بهالبانل الأخير رح نحكي عن human trafficking and modern day slavery. بندعي للمنصة باربي لاتزانادو, author Roadmap to Hell, Sex, Drugs and Guns on the Mafia Coast, CNN contributor, Rome Bureau Chief, Newsweek, The Daily Beast. مدعي أيضا دام جولي أوكادونلي, Directeur Général, NAPTIP Nigeria, Princess Okokon, former victim of human trafficking, Daniela Sala, Italian journalist. بحاورون الأستاذ سام كوبلويكس, Harvard Human Rights Center Fellow.
So thank you very much for sticking around. I feel very lucky to be moderating this panel. I think really the best panel has been saved for last. I want to do a quick introduction of our amazing panelists and get the conversation going because I think that I really would love to hear from them and try and stay out of their way. So just quickly, Princess Okokon is the founder and cultural mediator of PM, an Italian-based organization that approaches trafficked women on the street and provides them with alternative lives. A former victim of trafficking herself, Princess was born in Nigeria and now helps hundreds of women like her in Italy. Dame Julie Okodonli is the Director General of Nigeria's National Agency for Prohibition of Trafficking in Persons, receiving a degree in law from
Ahmadu Bello University.
Thank you. She is an legal expert for 25 years and has previously served as a manager at the Nigerian Securities and Exchange Commission, a legal advisor at the Nigerian Capital Markets Institute, and many other roles. Daniela Sala is an Italian journalist specialized in migration, trafficking, and labor exploitation. Her work has appeared in The Guardian, News Deeply, and various Italian national papers. She is currently working on a long-term project about women trafficked survivors. And finally, Barbie Latz-Nadeau is an American foreign correspondent in Rome since 1996. She served as the bureau chief for Newsweek and the Daily Beast and is a contributor to CNN. She focuses on migrant and women's issues. Her recent book, Roadmap to Hell, Sex, Drugs, and Guns on the Mafia Coast, outlines the saga of tens of thousands of Nigerian women and girls who are trafficked into Italy. So before we get the conversation going, I want to just go through and define some terms. Barbie, if you don't mind defining the difference between trafficked women and sex workers for us.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, can we get the last mic working, please?
You can hear me now. Okay, I think that's it. I think this is especially important for journalists, but it's also important for society as a whole that we understand the difference between women who are trafficked for sex and women who do sex work. They're two very entirely different things. Prostitution and sex work, as defined by the United Nations, is a transaction guided by consent. Victims of trafficking do not give consent. They are slaves. And I think that we journalists, especially when we cover this story, do a disservice to those victims when we call them prostitutes. And so I hope that none of you from this point forward will ever refer to a woman, a victim of sex trafficking, as such, because it's not the same thing. They are victims of modern slavery. And that's a term I hope you'll take with you today.
So relatedly, it'd be helpful to define the difference between smugglers and traffickers. Dame Julie, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. A smuggler is someone who moves people from one location to another out of the country, most of the time with the consent of those people initially. A trafficker, on the other hand, does not give consent, to their situation. And if at all they initially consent, by virtue of the circumstances now surrounding their situation, their consent is already or taken off them, because their travel documents are usually seized from them. Their freedom is seized from them, so they no longer become migrants, they now become trafficking. So there's a very thin line between a regular or irregular migrant and a trafficked victim by virtue of their confinement to wherever they find themselves in.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. So we're going to be focusing on Nigeria and Italy specifically in this discussion. And one issue is the madam system in Italy and how women are trafficked for sex work. Princess, if you could tell us a little bit about that system and maybe your personal experience.
Yeah, thank you very much for making me one of the speakers today about this. The madams are the women, and they are divided into two groups. The first part of the madams are from the country of origin. They are the people that are trying to get the victims, convincing them, giving them fake promises, and oblige them to take some kind of ritual oaths by telling them that when they come to the country of destination, they have to be obeyed to the madams of the host country, and they must pay their debts. And when the departure takes place, the madams in the host countries like Italy are those that give the hospitality for the victims. The victims live in the houses with them. They don't have any authority to go out without the consent of the madams. The madams are those who also give them other kinds of rituals or to take in order to put them in fear, not to escape from their traffickers. And the madams are those who find some kind of places we call joints for the girl to stand and walk in the streets. They're the ones that record down their debts, and they're the ones that oblige them not to escape. And the debts might be more than what the agreement was in the country of origin. That means that the second madams in Italy are those who are taking the house rents, the house bills, the food money. They're the ones that buy the clothes for the girls, and each thing they bought for the girls, the victims paid double amount of whatever they buy for them. That they want to control the activities of the girls, their movement, they are going out and coming in, and the money that they are bringing. The madams pour out the bags of the girl immediately the victims comes back from work. They remove all the money and they empty their bags. They don't allow them to make calls. They don't allow them to call their family unless they finish to pay their debts.
And can you tell us a little bit about your personal story? How were you first involved, and where were you? How old were you? What were you doing?
Yeah, my story is almost like other individual victims of trafficking. I was trafficked from Nigeria to Italy in the year 1999 by the group of mafias. And one of the madam who lived in Italy before came back to Nigeria, and she was luxurious wealthy. And she came to my restaurants in my state, in Akwa Ibom state. She proposed to me that I'm a good cook, that if she sponsored me to Europe, that within 6 months' time I can work and pay her the expenses and become a rich woman. With these concepts, being that I saw that she was rich and I believed her, she promised that I would be a chef in Italy. So I joined her. She made me to swear an oath that I'll pay the sum of $40,000. But when I came to Italy, they changed the amount to $45,000. She trafficked me, they organized the document for me, and I passed Murtala Mohammed Airport in 1999. I was taken to UK. In UK, they told me that I have to seek asylum as one of the women from Sierra Leone. After that, the organized group in UK, they now took me to France, from France to Italy. Getting to Italy, I now understand that I was in trouble because they took me to one of the traffickers' house in Torino, Then I met other 5 girls. Then they told me that I have to be sold out. One day, two madams came to buy the girls. Then I knew that I was a victim of trafficking. They bought me with the sum of 13,000 dollars by then, and the woman told me that I need to pay 45,000. Getting home, after one day, she told me that I need to start work. I believed that I want to go to the restaurant, but by the time she brought some kind of sexy wears with high heel shoes, I now said, I cannot work in restaurant with these shoes. What do you mean by that? She poured out the money she worked the previous night, because most of the madams are ex-victims of trafficking also. She told me that she paid her madam 40,000, and I need to pay her because that was the first girl she bought. Then she took me to the streets. It was very dangerous for me. I wept for over 1 week until the group tore my head into pieces. I had to be admitted in the hospital for 1 week. It was then I decided to join them because I did not have any option. I started working in the streets for about 6 months before I could know someone who could deliver me. I spoke with the person because he speaks English, and the person listened to me. Most of the time, the clients does not listen to the victims. They thought that maybe we are sex workers. So when the man listened to me, I told him that I want to escape, but I don't want to escape far. I want to pay my debt so that I can help other victims of trafficking. That was how they helped me, took me to the priest of Catholic mission in Asti. So I escaped from Torino to Asti. Then the priest asked me, what do you want to do, princess? I said, I want to help the victims. So it was then the priest followed me with my husband and his friend who became my manager. We went to Torino street and talked to the girls. When they confirmed my story, the priest gave us an office, and I started my work for 7 months voluntarily. The money I cleaned some offices, I used it to feed some of the victims that ran away from me. About 4 of them escaped with me to Asti. And all the traffickers in Torino was on my neck. They were disturbing me on phone, threatening to kill me. But God supported me up to today. That was how we founded Panel5, the project of integration and welcome to migrants, especially the victims of trafficking in Asti. We offer assistance to the victims, shelter home, educational training courses of mediators. We train cultural mediators in my sector, in the sector of anti-trafficking. How can we convince the victim to escape? How can we tell the victims that the oath is not working? We educate them in these areas. We send them to professional courses. Many of them become an assistant nurses in the hospital. Panel5 is great now. We have about 160 people we are taking care of now because we expanded to the projects of refugee in 2014. 2005, Panel5 went back to Nigeria for international project called Safe Sex Long Life in order for us to give awareness. I was one of the testimonies. We show our films. We work with journalists all over the world in order to make documentaries, to speak our dialect, to tell the people in Nigeria, don't come, this is what is happening.
Thank you very much for sharing your story and the work that you do. Oh, thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much for sharing your story and the work that you do. I want to pick up on one thing that you were talking about, which was expanding to refugees and the recent migrant crisis that we've been hearing about so much. Danielle, if you don't mind, can you contextualize this for us? How does this issue fit into the migrant crisis? Is it longer? Is it shorter? How do they relate to one another?
Yeah, I think that, one social worker once told me, if we want to fight trafficking, we have to think like traffickers. And what traffickers have been doing in recent years is exactly to take advantages of existing migration routes, because back in the 90s, trafficked women were arriving usually on a tourist visa or in different ways, in safer way compared to now, because now they follow the route through the desert and then through the Mediterranean. And this way also with the like sorting of the arrival in Italy, crossing the Mediterraneans, like they are together with group of migrants and asylum seekers, and they often end up in these huge reception centers where usually social workers are not well trained enough, so they miss to understand and to get in touch who are the potential victim of trafficking. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that there are a lot of intersection between like migration routes and trafficked women routes. Of course, they are two completely different phenomena, but there are a lot of intersection.
Great. Dame Julie, if you have anything to add to that kind of contextualization of sex workers in relation to the migrant crisis that we're hearing about in the last 4 years.
Now, are you talking about the difference between sex workers and trafficked women, or what?
Trafficked women, sorry. Yes, I'm speaking about kind of the timeline that the issue of trafficked women, how long that timeline has been, how that manifests itself, especially in terms of routes versus the routes that we're seeing now in the migrant crisis.
Well, the issue of human trafficking in Nigeria dates back to like the mid-80s, you know, when people were actually going through the regular routes, like Princess said, through the airport routes. And as a matter of fact, some of them, not all, actually knew or thought they were going for prostitution, because then prostitution was common. But they didn't know that they would now be trafficked as sex workers, sexually exploited. You know, there's a difference between prostitution, you work for yourself, you're in control of yourself, your time, your money, but when you're sexually exploited, you work for someone else and you don't have control of your time. You're in bondage, more or less. So it started back then in the 80s. But now what we've seen is people are now going through the irregular routes through the Sahara Desert. From the north, they go through Libya and they cross the Mediterranean Sea to Europe. But the question I keep asking is this: if they succeeded in going through the irregular routes through the Sahara Desert and all of that, how do they get into Europe with all the technology that is in place, with all the trained border force and all of that? So you see, the issue of corruption is very high, because these law enforcement agents who are supposed to be protecting the integrity of the country are also conniving with the traffickers from the source countries and at the destination countries. So it is very easy for them to allow the irregular migrants to infiltrate into their countries. Secondly, on the issue of detention centers or camps or whatever they call them, for me, I think they should all be shut down, because that is an avenue for human trafficking, for sex, for crimes, and all sorts of bad things. Because what happens is that when these irregular migrants come into the detention camps, the security people there, they connive with the mafia. And they give these girls out to them. They sell these girls to them. They collect money from them, and all sorts of atrocities take place. So why I'm proposing for a situation whereby if irregular migrants go to any country, maximum 1 month. If they are seeking asylum, is yes or no? If it's no, send them back to their countries. But don't keep them in any detention centers, because after a while they disappear. And that is how human trafficking has come to stay. Thank you.
Thank you. Barry, I wonder if you can add a perspective to this, having dealt with irregular migrants in Italy.
Absolutely. I think one of the big areas that people don't understand when we're talking about sex trafficking especially is sort of the lack of cooperation between authorities in Italy, authorities in Nigeria, the lack of cooperation between those who deal with migration and those who are supposed to be helping try to find and identify victims of sex trafficking. Everyone works in their own little bubble, and there's very little collaboration between these groups. So you might have a young woman or a group of young women who are rescued at sea crossing from Libya into Italy, they may end up in a detention center. They may be such clear victims of trafficking. Everyone may recognize that they're victims of trafficking, and everyone may talk about it among themselves on the rescue boat. They're saying those 5 girls are victims. In the detention center, they're saying the same thing, but nobody talks to anybody else. And everyone, as a result of that, falls through the cracks.
Yeah.
In 2016, 11,000 women from Nigeria crossed the sea in 1 year alone. 80% of those, at a minimum, were trafficked into the sex trade in Italy. This is Europe. This shouldn't be happening.
Thank you. Do you have, yes, Princess.
Yeah, concerning this, I had some things to add. In the host country, I think immediately the migrants arrive because we are working particularly to identify the victims of trafficking among the regular migrants, among the refugees. So the government of Italy set up some kind of strong protection projects for the victims of trafficking. But we see that the force agency are delayed to take a step. What are they gonna do? Immediately we separate the victims of trafficking, victims of sex trade, let us put it like that, the slaves that come among the refugees. In this case, they should not, as my sister said, they should not keep so long to give us the results from the commissions, because somebody might be in the refugee camp for 2 years before the commission now said you have a status to remain in Italy. Some might migrate from Italy to another country, some might be deported back to Italy after some years, and all these people that does not have any handwork to do. They don't belong to any group for any reorientations. They don't belong to each group for any rehabilitations. They are the people that bring more crimes to the country of host. Then another thing I want to say is that most of the time the victims of trafficking have been educated to denounce their traffickers, but the force agency, enforcement group, they're not doing anything to arrest the traffickers. Some of the time when arrested the traffickers, they put them in jail for just 2 or 4 years and remove them again. And they did not deport them back to the country of origin. They're still remaining there. That means that even their brothers, their own partners are still bringing more girls into this system. The last one, not the least, I want to say that at least in the country of origin, our government should empower women, should do a lot of work on the youth by maybe giving out scholarships or microcredits to the women in the rural areas, because we have seen that the traffickers have gone beyond the cities. They've gone to rural areas to pick even the minors. Most of the women we have now, they are the minors. And the last one, we always say that if there is some goods that brought to the market square and there is no buyer, that means that nobody would like to sell the goods again. In all the world, the European nations, the European countries, we are talking of Nigerians, but there are buyers that are waiting for these goods. There are buyers that are waiting for these lovely young ladies. If they does not give out money for the women to pay back the traffickers, I think the traffickers will not have more money to continue the trade. So we need to educate our men, right from the square root, from the schools, to even our fathers in the countries for sexual educational training. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we've moved into an interesting topic, which is basically what's present in both the host country and the origin country that is causing this this route, this market. Maybe let's start with the country of origin. And Julie, if you can tell us a little bit about your work and maybe what you'd like to see in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you very much. When we talk about the root causes of human trafficking, most of the time we restrict it to the root causes in the country of origin. That is where the irregular migrants go from. But there's always a missing link. We do not address the root causes in the destination countries. You know, in the countries of origin, yes, there are various factors that lead to human trafficking. It's not a one-way traffic. There are factors like poverty, ignorance, lack of education, lack of jobs, and so on and so forth. What about the root causes in the destination countries? Prostitution is legal in most of the European countries. As long as prostitution is legal, it will be very difficult to stamp out human trafficking. So we need to do something about that. We have pornographic sites. A lot of pornography sites are on. Nobody clamps down on them, and they sell sex. They love cheap labor. If you go to hotels and restaurants, you see people from the Philippines. Where did they come from? You need to ask those questions. Where did they come from? Who is regulating the labor industries? How much wages are they paying them? Most of them are victims of human trafficking. Now, a lot of people are on the queue waiting for organ transplants. Now they buy organs in the black market. Who has those organs? So you see, there are so many root factors in the destination countries that are not addressed, and we need to address it simultaneously, side by side. While the countries of origin are addressing their root causes, the countries of destination should also be addressing their root causes. Otherwise, we'll be wasting our time. For example, I use Italy as an example because most of the Nigerian girls are trafficked in Italy. That's why I keep referring to Italy. For example, in Italy, how many mafia gangs have they prosecuted? Can you tell me? No. How many mafia gangs have they prosecuted? How many assets have been confiscated? How many funds have been frozen? You know, all these are very important because as long as they keep protecting their own, there will be a problem. For example, I get a call and they say, you know what, we are repatriating 2 traffickers. And I ask them, yes, very good, you're repatriating two Nigerians to Nigeria. I'm going to send them to jail. But where are the traffickers that come from Italy? Where are the Italians that are doing this business with them? And the answer is nothing. So it's a big problem. We must not deceive ourselves or point fingers at each other, but together we must fight the root causes and address it transparently, honestly, and truthfully. Thank you.
So to follow up on that, I guess, is there a system of collaboration? Is there a way that the Nigerian government and the, say, Italian government or other governments in the EU can or are working together?
Yes, of course. Nigerian government through NAPTIP, where I'm DG, we work, we have, most of the time we have bilateral agreements, but the truth is that so far I've not really gotten much from some countries. But UK, Germany, Netherlands will have a very good working relationship. We've had joint operations together, NAPTIP officials and the UK border police. We've had very successful operations in the Gatwick airport and the Heathrow airport. We had joint investigations. We've had with the Netherlands called Operation Coolvies. We've had different operations with different countries so far. But funny enough, the country that has the most endemic problem, which is Italy, has not been able to do any joint operations or joint investigations with us. And we are still hoping and praying that we'll get there because we really need to do that. Thank you.
So, Princess, since you've been living and working in Italy on this issue, what's your perspective on how Italy's handling this? And also, do you have any ideas of how countries of origin, for instance, Nigeria, can be improving to mitigate this problem?
Yeah. In the areas of my job in Italy, because I live in Italy, I work for the victims that are in Italy. I always trying my best now with my organization to train more social operators, cultural mediators, anti-trafficking. What do I mean by that? We really want to identify the victims of trafficking and educating them that the power of oath does not have any effect on them. And we try to convince the victims to try to identify their traffickers. Because if Italian government or UN spend their money on the victims every year, and the traffickers are still remain silent, nobody touches them, the market will continue. So now, the effort we are putting in is to convince the victims to identify their traffickers, and we collaborate with the police, Carabinieri, and force agencies to arrest them. Like yesterday, I had a notice that in my state there have been arrested 7 people. And with the collaboration of NAPTIP, now my colleague nearer to me, we want to get closer so that those traffickers must be deported back home. They should not remain in Italy so that they can be jailing them in Nigeria. They know what it means when you are in jail in Nigeria. Because here in Europe, they will tell you that after all, I will go for 4 years, I will still get out from the jail. Then we are working, collaborating with Studi Legale, that's the lawyers, Italian advocates, in order to fight for the victims of trafficking and won their cases. We really do a lot of job with them, collaborating with them to explain how the matters go, so that when the traffickers paid a good lawyer, the lawyer should know the problem of the victims. He should not fight for the trafficker, because the trafficker now take good lawyers that pay for them and they win some cases. So now we are working in that area. The last stimulation practice we did in Italy was last month, which all the forces, agencies collaborate together, both Carabinieri, and start to do a kind of raiding, entering into houses, those that are working in hotels, those that are working indoors, at least to try to get the traffickers. The most important thing is to get the traffickers. And we are working on this, making sure that their identification goes on, and according to the law of Act 18 of Italy, that says that if a victim of trafficking, they are traffickers, they're entitled into the government benefits. We don't want to give out this benefit free of charge without catching the trafficker. I think that is one of the routes. Then in Nigeria, we are trying to work with some of the actresses, maybe to shoot films, to go to the villages, to give out more information, awareness, to create a particular groups like operators, in order to speak to the youth that there is fake promises. The promises the traffickers give out is not true, that they should be aware of the traffickers. Then the NAPTIP should be involved, especially in the areas that when the victims denounce their traffickers, the traffickers send mafia to their parents in Nigeria, which we have been talking about today. How can we be collaborating together so that they can protect the family of the victims in the country of origin?
Great, thank you. So we've heard a number of tools. It sounds like information, awareness raising, law enforcement, even economic incentives. Daniela, is there any other tools that you can think of that maybe exist in other migrant flows that could be applied here that would be helpful?
Actually, I mean, Princess mentioned, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that she said. I think that information is key. I mean, information in the society, because as she was saying before, like, if there is an economy around women trafficking, it's also because there are men, like, going on the street and looking for this girl, and actually they are looking for younger and younger girl and for new and new girl, and this is how the trafficking keep going. So we need information in this sense, and we also need more information for women, and I think that we should really put an effort in having more like Nigerian cultural mediator, because of course there is a whole different level of trust. If it is an Italian social worker communicating with a woman who is a potential victim of trafficking, and also, I mean, I think that another key point is which kind of options you can offer to this girl, because they came to Italy with hopes and with the idea of like raising money for the family and so on. And so if the only option that you can offer them is, I don't know, an internship for 6 months where they are paid 200 euros per month, that's not actually an option.
So the issue of buyer has come up a number of times now. Do you know of any incentives? Do either of you know of any incentives or initiatives that have been started to try to mitigate that problem?
Well, this is the big blind spot in trafficking, is there would be no demand if there wasn't, or there'd be no supply if there wasn't a demand. And right now in Italy, there is not one single initiative to inform clients of prostitutes that they could be purchasing a sex trafficked victim. The International Office of Migration has something in the works. They've prepared some pamphlets that they're ready to hand out to men so they understand that the 14-year-old Nigerian girl is not there because she wants to, and so that they understand that her voyage comes with a price, and that their pleasure is part of the cycle that keeps slavery alive. And until the clients are addressed, until someone goes out on the streets and tries to stop the clients from buying these young women, I don't think there will be a successful effort. A lot of people argue that by making prostitution illegal in Italy, you would somehow solve this problem. I, for one, feel that it would actually make it worse for the trafficked women, because then everyone would be looking for a trafficked woman, because it wouldn't take the trafficked women off the streets. It would just drive them deeper into the underground. There is no regulation. In Italy used to have regulated sex work. Right now it's a free-for-all, and the women that are trafficked for sex, it's very easy for police officers and authorities to turn a blind eye to them as long as they consider them prostitutes. As long as they don't make the distinction, there will be a problem.
And does the issue of race play a role here? I mean, when we're talking about legalization of prostitution, if any of the panelists want to address that, or especially from an Italian perspective.
In my research, it's shocking to know that Nigerian women, that women of color, cannot charge the same amount for sex as Eastern European women, for example. It's shocking to learn that a lot of Italian men like to go with women of color because it's taboo in their society. All of this contributes to the problem. And it's not something that people like to talk about, and it's not something that people like to address, but it's an issue, it's a facet of it. And I'm sure that Princess has probably more experience in talking to some of the victims about this and about how that racism plays a role even in how these women are treated, and the difficult situation that they find themselves in.
Do you want to share anything about some of the stories or experiences that you've heard of recent?
Really, what I want to talk about is still on legislation concerning the European law concerning prostitution or for the victims of trafficking. Mainly the men believe that prostitution is legal in Italy, no? And then they have the right to go to a prostitute. But through our awareness, that must convince these men that all the prostitutes standing there along the street line is not prostitute, but they are victims of trafficking, which is more different. So in this case, I think if we return back to the legislation sector, if the law can be amended or can be changed, that maybe prostitution, or let's say prostitution on the streets, along the roadside, should not be tolerated, no? Or should put some sanctions on the claims going to these women. Maybe we might have a little bit progress on it. As I said before, the women come to Italy because the traffickers brought them because they know that there is interest. They gain a lot of money. The European men love black women right from 1980s. When they came to pick tomatoes in Napoli, they didn't come for prostitution as well. They came to work. They came to work and receive their wages. But the story started in that 1980s, that these men fell in love with black women from Yoruba land. Then when the women who were mothers, wives returned back home, they said, if these men can fall in love with us, how much more if we send the young ones? That means that they can pay more money. And it is true that in Italy, the clans paid some of our debts. They paid debt to make the girls be free. But it doesn't give us authority to continue in this habit. So let's take this case into the legislative level.
Yes,
Yeah, I
please.
want to correct an impression. The Palermo Protocol is very clear on trafficked victims. And it says that A trafficked victim must not be treated as a criminal, but as a victim. So the laws are already there, but it's for those laws to be implemented. For example, when the victims are in the detention centers, their rights are not read to them. So they don't even know they have rights. So the first thing to do is to read these rights to them, make them conscious of the rights to remain in Italy once they are identified as victims of human trafficking, the rights to be given a job, to earn a living wherever they are, not just in Italy, in the destination countries, the rights to be respected, and the rights to a lawyer. But these rights are never read to the victims. So the victims are scared. They think they are criminals because they are treated as criminals. And they think they are going to be deported. So they are so scared. Oh, if I mess up, they are going to deport me back. And it's like a double jeopardy thing. So they take advantage of that. So it's very important now that the frontline officers are trained. But most of them even know, but they pretend not to know. So for the avoidance of doubt, it's very important that those frontline officers must be trained to identify the victims of human trafficking and to respect their human rights, because it's very important. In the area of awareness, NAPTIP has gone really, really, really far. What we do is we go everywhere, from the schools, the churches, the mosque. We involve the CSOs, the NGOs. We involve everybody. It's like all of society and all of government. It's not just a government thing. We have shelters. We have shelters in NAPTIP where the rescued girls are taken to our shelters. We counsel them. We rehabilitate them. Some of them are university graduates now, courtesy of NAPTIP. Some of them are in schools. Right now, we're in the process of putting human trafficking as a subject in the primary and secondary school curricula. So people can now start to learn about human trafficking right from youth. So, you know, all of these are in place that we're doing. And Princess, we've gone a step ahead of what you're talking about. Now we have engaged the juju priest who make these girls to swear an oath. They have now become ambassadors for NAPTIP. They've denounced this oath on these girls. I can give you videos so you can show the girls. So maybe it will give them some comfort and they will begin to talk. Because they've put fear in these girls. So these girls are so scared. So we have engaged all the juju priests and they've denounced these curses on the girls. And they've promised us that if any of the madams should go with the girls, they will call NAPTIP and we'll arrest them. So we've gone a step ahead of that, you know. And so we've put all this process into motion now to ensure that these girls are protected and it does not happen to anybody. Thank you.
So I want to follow up. I want to follow up on the families of the girls who are back in Nigeria. If they were to leave, some of them were to, if they were to leave from their madam in Italy. Princess and I were talking about this last night, that sometimes the families, there's some retribution on those families back in Nigeria. Is NATIP doing anything? NATIP is the organization that's in charge of preventing trafficking in Nigeria. Is it doing anything to protect those families?
Absolutely. Like I was telling Princess, all we need is information. If we get any information of any threats to anyone, anywhere in Nigeria, we'll make arrests. We've made some arrests like that in the past, where some of the traffickers were threatening the families of the victims. We arrested them and prosecuted them and made sure we send them to jail. So yes, we protect them. You know, what I failed to tell you is this. Even when we take these victims to the shelters and they are rehabilitated, we teach them skill acquisitions for those who don't want to go to formal education. We do not release them back into the community unless it is safe to do so. Before we release them, we go to the communities to counsel their family members, because some family members don't even want to see them anymore. They take it as a waste of time. Some of them sold all their belongings to send these girls abroad, thinking they were actually going for better life, you know, and they came back with nothing. So we go and we counsel the families, and if we see that they are not very comfortable, we don't send them back to the communities. We relocate them to a different community. So those are some of the steps we take. And right now we're also we're also starting a program called the National Orientation and Reorientation to change the mindset of the youths, because the youths just think that Europe is is heaven on earth. They think there's so much work in Europe, there's so much money everywhere, it's easy to get a job. Once you go to Europe, your life is made, you become rich. So we are trying to change the mindset of these ones, organizing seminars and conferences, and that's what we've been doing in NAPTIP. Thank you.
Sounds great. Daniela, I'm wondering about from Italy's side. There's definitely been a number of proposals put forward of what Italy could be doing better. What do you think of those proposals, and do you think that some of those steps are realistic?
Yes. I mean, in general, the legislation is in place. As it was mentioned already, like there are shelters like specific for victims of trafficking. There is a legislation, there is a specific legislation defending them. The main problem is implementation, again. So we lack cultural mediator, we lack information, we lack maybe only from the legislative point of view, to get back to what Barbie was saying, is that since traffickers learned how to take advantage of the migration routes and the asylum system, what is happening now is that the majority of this court, they ask for asylum. So for quite a long period of time, as asylum seeker, they are legal stayers on the Italian soil, which means that even if the police find them on the street, and they know what they are there for, they check their documents and they cannot do anything because they see they have regular papers, so there is not much that they can do. So, but I mean, again, the problem is that they are not like properly recognized as victims of trafficking. They are just addressed as regular migrants.
I wonder if there's other organizations that are governmentally supported or coming from the government that these officers could send women that they've interacted with to.
In my experience and my research in this, the Catholic Church obviously is doing a lot. They spend a lot of time in trying to get the women off the streets. A lot of the times the young women will end up pregnant because they're told they can charge the clients twice as much if the clients don't use a condom. So they want to pay off their debt, so they say you don't have to use a condom. A lot of those young women end up pregnant, in which case the church steps in and takes care where the state fails. But one of the other big issues I think with this that we cannot make more clear is how afraid these victims are. So many people I've talked to ended up being forced by their madams to send text messages and pictures back home to Nigeria to their friends saying how great their life is. That helps perpetuate the lie. And if a girl has a threat of a knife to her head, or a lot of times the threat, if they're not compliant on the street, is rape or gang rape. That's what they're facing if they don't go out on the street. And so if a girl has that as a threat against her, of course she's going to lie and say to her family, everything's fine here in Europe, because someone's going to make things a lot worse for her. And all of that, somewhere in this cycle, there has to be a place to stop it. Whether it's the lie going by the madams in Nigeria, whether it's the lies that go back to Nigeria, somewhere along this horrific cycle that's been going on for years and years and just gets worse and worse. Somewhere there has to be a way to stop it, to have a safe place and truth to the girls in Nigeria before they take off and want to be a chef in Italy, because it's believable. The traffickers, and Princess's story is amazing in the sense, so many of the women I've met who are victims of trafficking are intelligent, educated women. Princess had her own restaurant in Nigeria, and she was given an opportunity to have a better life. Who wouldn't want that? We are all potential victims. Who doesn't want a better life? And I think, when you're combating that, it's going to take more than one solution to stop this problem. It's going to take solutions from all angles to really make a difference.
Thank you. So before we wrap up, I'm hoping to get some questions from the audience. We'll try and do two at a time. Is there anyone with a microphone? We have two people here. Okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Robin Julian Habaz. I have worked with the International Organization for Migration in a project to prevent and assist victims of trafficking and labor exploitation. Better? Okay. I've worked with a project to prevent and assist trafficking victims and victims of labor exploitation. It's not a question so much as a comment. One of the issues that we have faced while working in this project was actually to get the word out. And we've worked on a huge awareness raising campaign whereby we differentiate, as the Palermo Protocol states, we differentiate what a victim is and what a criminal is. However, a lot of the things that we have noticed while training judiciary police and people who are frontliners basically within the government or the police or anywhere is that they do not understand what a victim of trafficking is. They do not understand what trafficking is. And I think that this is basically the issue everywhere. People who work in the government, in general security here in Lebanon, in internal security forces, do not understand that there is a huge issue. And every person they come across, whether it's a sex worker who's actually a trafficking victim, they treat as a criminal and they just throw in jail. And I think that maybe we should possibly work with countries who are who have signed and ratified the Palermo Protocol and actually enforce these laws that have already been ratified, and maybe try to shed some light on it and work with several different organizations. And the problem is we do not have enough funding in a country like Lebanon on projects to combat trafficking. So.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Look, sorry, the woman behind you was. If you. Yes, you.
Thank you very much. Esther is my name, from the Nigerian Embassy in Beirut. Thank you, Madam Julie, for that well-delivered speech. It's quite inspiring and encouraging. Now, I would like to observe two things, and they're actually questions. From what you've said so far, you made us to understand your agency has done so much to sensitize Nigerian girls especially, about the issue of human trafficking and all the ills associated with this menace. But I want to ask whether you've been able to utilize the social media platform, because that is the most effective platform today to reach to the youths, to send messages to them all the time, photographs and pictures and all, whatever you can, to let them realize that what they are being told by the human traffickers are absolute lies. That Europe is not heaven, it's not El Dorado. I was there, I lived there many years. And I know life is not easy in Europe. Have you been able to extend your outreach through the social media platform? That's the first question. Number two, we are talking about human trafficking, affecting many countries around the world. Talking of destination countries and the origin countries. You talk a lot about Italy, a little about UK, and so on and so forth. What is your experience in the Middle East about girls being trafficked? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Would you
Go
like
ahead.
to? Please.
Thank you for these very important questions. The IOM lady talked about which is true, a lot of the frontline officers in these destination countries do not have an idea of what a trafficked victim is. They see them as irregular migrants and as criminals. So all it requires is training. You don't need too much money to train them, those frontline officers, to know the difference between a potential victim of trafficking and a prostitute or a criminal. Very important. Training will solve that. Yes, social media, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We do a lot of that on the social media as well. We use every medium. Yes, a most disturbing phenomenon that is now taking place in the Middle East. A lot of young girls are now going, they are deceiving them again. They're going to give them jobs as maids and nurses in Saudi Arabia, Oman, Dubai. So this is the latest trend now. They are taking very young girls in their thousands to the Middle East. NAPTIP, unfortunately, we are not at the airports, but whenever we have any information, intelligence, our officers go and they intercept them. Last week, we intercepted 16 young girls, and right now, they are in our shelters. We stopped them from going to Saudi Arabia. They are in our shelters undergoing counseling, and we are trying to make a strong case to the government to stop anybody from going to Saudi Arabia, Dubai, or Oman under the guise of working as a housemaid or a nurse. And we hope that they are going to approve it. Thank you.
Great. Yes.
I have just one comment to add on the IOM comment, and I think when you ask the Italian authorities why they aren't focused on victims of trafficking, they'll tell you that in 2016, 181,000 people came across the sea. In 2017, 119,000 people came across the sea. And their priority is national security. They want to make sure there are no terrorists on the boat. Their second priority are the unaccompanied minors, all those little children whose parents died in Libya or in the water. And so by the time they get around to checking out if someone may be a victim of trafficking, those girls have already been taken away by the traffickers on the ground in Italy. And everything we talk about, there are traffickers working in Italy that are part of this. There are Italians working in Italy that are part of this. And hasn't been a focus.
Yeah, answered her. We use the social media as well. Yeah.
Princess, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the videos that you have released?
Yeah, we work, we collaborate with a lot of actresses and journalists in the old nations, international and even in Italy, to shoot out some short films on social medias like YouTube, Facebook, website, in order to give out awareness to the victims of trafficking and also those who have never heard of these stories, in order to convince them not to come or not to be tricked by the traffickers. And another route we use is that we, the social mediators, we normally go to the shelter homes, the emergency camps, in order to give the new arrivals information about the risk of trafficking, about the trick that the traffickers use to bring them out of the emergency camp. We tried all our best to convince them to remain in the government refugee camps so that they can get more information and awareness. And we believe that this kind of job is helping a lot, because we try to believe that if about 1,000 girls does not go to the traffickers, they might lose their money and they wouldn't be able to bring more girls into the Italy again. Then another thing we are trying to do again is that we are trying to convince the victims to identify the traffickers. They should speak out. They should be witnesses. Then we train even the young ones not to become madams and not to think of being on the roadside to work for these people. They are afraid of the rituals voodoo they took. We converted them to be believers of the gospel by taking them to churches in order to educate them in gospel way, so that they will have another power to overcome the rituals of oath, and also give them counselors like psychologists in order to counsel them monthly. This is not enough. What we are thinking is about how the enforcement agency can collaborate with all the NGOs, both in the host country and the country of destination, to arrest these traffickers. Because most of the time, the victims might denounce the traffickers, but the delay is too much because they said lack of funding. How can we get these traffickers that are roaming up and down the whole world? So they have to do their job while we, the NGOs, are doing our own part of job. Then lastly, I always said that let our governments in the country of origin at least create some kind of employment to the youth, create some kind of scholarships, because most of the stories of the victims they are dropped out from schools. They did not finish their secondary educations. Let our government give out microcredits to the women of the rural areas so that they can trade and pay school fees and train their children. I think with this, we can be able to fight the trafficking.
Thank you.
I do not totally agree with what Princess has just said, because the truth is that most of the people who are victims are not necessarily the poorest in Nigeria. Some of them already have things doing already, and they think that they are going for a better life, So they abandon their jobs. Some of them abandon their schools. Some of them pay as much as 500,000 to 1 million naira. If I have 1 million naira, I know what I'll do with that money. So if you have so much money to give to traffickers to traffic you, then you cannot be talking about governments not giving you jobs and all of that. Most of it is just ignorance and their mindset. They must begin to, that's why we're trying to change the mindset for them to stop thinking that anything outside Nigeria is the best. They must believe in Nigeria first and then believe in themselves. This is very, very important. Thank
Great.
you.
If we can just take one more question.
Libya has been mentioned so many times. Today, when you talk about refugees or human trafficking or whatever, it's Libya. I have to apologize on behalf of the innocent Libyan people who are also victims for what's going on. But sadly, you have to know that we are trapped and hostages by an illegal government that has been put on us by the West, by Europe, by the American, and they call it the international recognized government, not the national recognized government. So, having this political reality, of course, Libya today became a jungle. And I'm sorry to tell you, bad stories, that the UN expert report that just came a few days ago is very alarming. Let us not, let us face the fact that it's going to be the situation of the refugees, the traffickers, it's going to be further deteriorated. 2 summits I attended when I was an ambassador, 2 summits at the EU, blah, 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 talking about this issue, nothing happened. Why? I tell you why. It is a corrupt system. We have been bringing names of traffickers. They never want to bring them to justice. Yes. Only 3 days ago, they named 1 Libyan, 7 Maltese, 1 Italian. The mafia between Malta and Italy, it's business, so it's not only Libyan alone. It is a very dirty business. Also, the irony that we have been following in the news lately, even the humanitarian, the UN humanitarian workers have also been raping, and Amnesty International, big issue is all over. So I really think it's all connected. It is, not only women, also children, by the way. And I have been for for the last 4, 5, 6 years, I know what's going on in Libya with the women in the Libyan jails. It's horrible, horrifying. And sadly enough again, because all these politicians who are all connected again, they have vested interests, the EU has been a failure, a big failure. And I don't know, and there is a secret, why the issue they have not been able to solve it. They are only ruining our countries rather than helping our countries, and then they pointing fingers to us. You Libyan, you have the slave market. Yes, there was a slave market. Because it's we have no government. A weak government, a corrupt government, and a legitimate government. So this is the price, and they still recognize it. Best.
Thank you.
Thank you.